I just want to thank you for just allowing me to be here today to speak to you about something that I think is very, very important. And the Bible speaks of it quite a bit, and it's very relevant today. And we're going to find out in just a little bit what that is, because it's been a problem since the beginning of man, since man's been around. But what I want to start out with is an old king who ruled over Judah about 780 years before the time of Christ. And it's from way back in the book of 2 Chronicles, and that would be old King Uzziah. Now, old King Uzziah was somewhere in the middle of the pack of kings that ruled over Judah after the death of Solomon in 931. You see, after the death of Solomon, the kingdom was split in two. You see, you have the northern kingdom of Israel, and you have the smaller kingdom of Judah down at the bottom. So after Solomon died, it was split in two. So in addition to the common enemy that they were always fighting with Babylon. Israel was always fighting with the Assyrians. Judah was always fighting with Babylon. And when they weren't fighting with those two, they were fighting with each other. So you had this line of kings that started with Solomon, and the kingdom was split, and that lasted until the Babylonian exile. And right in the middle, you have a good king called King Uzziah, who in some manuscripts is called Azariah, but the KJV calls him Uzziah. So that's what we're going to call him, because that's what the KJV says. So the men that preceded him, if you can see this up here, it's kind of probably small where you're sitting. But that's all of the kings that ruled over Judah. That's a whole chart of them. And the men that preceded him, who were King Joash and King Amaziah, they were his grandfather and his father, respectively. And they started off, like a lot of people do, with very, very good intentions. But if you could see that they led the kingdom down a path of idolatry and sin and out of favor with God. And something bad usually happened to them. The two kings before him ended up dying in a conspiracy. And the people of Judah are very, very tired of the way things are. And they want a king who will lead them back to the glory days of David and Solomon. So they elect a new king. They elect Uzziah to be their king because they're beleaguered and they're tired of fighting. And they want to change. And the book of Chronicles was written for the encouragement of a tiny little nation trying to find itself, trying to find its place. So let's look at this passage. Let's go in the Wayback Machine, way back to the book of 2 Chronicles, chapter 26, starting at verse 1. Second Chronicles 26, starting at verse 1. Then all of the people of Judah took Uzziah, who was 16 years old, and made him king in the room of his father Amaziah. He built Eloth and restored it to Judah, and after that the king slept with his fathers. 16 years old was Uzziah when he began to reign, and he reigned 52 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Jechaliah of Jerusalem. And he did that which was right according to the sight of the Lord, according to all his father Amaziah did. And he sought God in the days of Zechariah, who had understanding the visions of God. And as he sought the Lord, God made him prosper. Uzziah reigned over Judah for 52 years. 52 years. Think about that. That's a long time to do anything. And when you reign over something, or when you're in charge of something for 52 years, you have to be pretty good at what you do, or you have to be pretty popular. Queen Elizabeth has been Queen of England for 63 years. And she's very popular, well, because she's the queen. And she has no real power. She's a figurehead over England. But this man had power. And it's generally accepted, whether it's true or not, that if somebody's been doing something for a very long time, they must be doing a pretty good job. You know, we think of our country as being very old, about 239 years old. But when compared with the rest of history, our country is really not that old at all. In fact, from the time King Solomon died in 931 BC until the Babylonian exile in 586, you had this reign of kings, excuse me, it lasted 345 years. Our nation's history would fit right in the middle of that reign of kings for 345 years. So we really haven't been around that long at all. We're relatively new compared with the rest of history. So Uzziah did a lot of great things for his people. He went out and he defeated the Philistines. He built cities, he built towers, he built roads, he built gates, he built fortresses. He greatly improved the infrastructure. He dug wells, he made waterways so that people could get water out to their pastures for farming. And he amassed a great army that was very well equipped to fight, and his fame spread far and wide. And Uzziah did what was right in the sight of the Lord for a little while. He built Judah up. Now you may be saying to yourself, why is he telling me a story about some old king that lived so long ago? Now don't yawn, this is really, really good stuff. I'm going somewhere with this, promise me. Why is he telling me a story about some old king that lived so long ago and he never did anything wrong and he reigned for 52 years? What does that have to do with me? Okay? I'm glad you asked, because I'm going to tell you. You see, Uzziah had a problem. He looked out at everything that he had built, his fortresses, his great army. He looked at his popularity. He looked at his numbers and thought, I've done pretty well. You see, his problem was a problem that people experience every day. He looked out on his great kingdom and he was filled with pride. And he probably thought, how can I make my life and my kingdom just a little bit better than they already are? You see, Uzziah had a problem. He was filled with self-centered pride. And I'm going to tell you, God hates that kind of pride. And people do it all the time. People look out at the place where they live at, they look at their beautiful subdivision and say, here's my SUV, and here's my minivan, and here's my 2.5 kids, and here's my boat in the driveway that I never have time to launch because I'm always busy working. I'm doing great at my job. I'm working my way up at the company. I might even be CEO someday. And let me say that there's nothing wrong with having all of those things. Here's the problem. When we look out at those things that we've amassed and we think, yeah, I did pretty good for myself. Wrong. It's pride. And God hates that kind of pride because it fails to give him the credit for everything that we have. And he hates that pride because it gets in the way of you and him. And sadly, I feel that this is the way our nation has gone down. We're so puffed up and filled with pride. And like I said, nothing wrong with being a proud American. But we've been prosperous for so long. And we think that it's part of our own hard work and our own dedication to purpose. And maybe it is. But we fail to give God the credit as the source of all of our blessings. Nothing wrong with having nice things. Nothing wrong at all. What I'm talking about is I'm talking about that self-centered pride that fails to give God the credit. A wise man once said, speaking of America, we have been the recipients of the choicest bounties of heaven. We have been preserved these many years in peace and prosperity. We have grown in numbers, wealth, and power as no nation has ever grown. But we have forgotten God. We have forgotten the gracious hand that preserved us in peace and multiplied and enriched and strengthened us. And we have vainly imagined in the deceitfulness of our hearts that all of our blessings were produced by some superior wisdom and virtue of our own. Intoxicated with unbroken success, we have become too self-sufficient to feel the necessity of redeeming and preserving grace. Too proud to pray to the God that made us. Sound like a speech made recently? Nope. Abraham Lincoln, 1863. You're a nation that has forgotten God. And God hates pride, and it's not beyond reason to think that God has withdrawn some of his blessings over the years from this country because of our pride, because of our disobedience. Now you may be saying, well, you know, why is he talking about pride so much? Aren't there worse things than pride? Like malice, like envy, deceit, murder? Yes, those are all bad. Very bad. But where do those things come from? I'll give you a hint. They all come from pride. James 4:6 says, God resists the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. He resists pride, but he gives grace to the humble. Last night, there was a championship boxing match. Two men were very, very successful at convincing millions of people that it was about boxing and not about money. A lot of people walked away with a lot of money because that's what it was about to them. How can we grab more money? How can we have more than what we already have? Because what we already have isn't good enough. We need more. And that's pride. It's saying, I haven't been blessed enough. I want more. Somebody once asked John D. Rockefeller, the nation's first billionaire, how much money is enough? You know what he said? He said, just a little bit more. Pride. Not being happy with what you have, wanting more. And another thing that pride does to us is pride contributes to something called individualism. You see, pride and humility cannot coexist with each other. They're opposites. Part of being a Christian is part of humbling yourself to something greater than you are in order to become a larger part of the body of Christ. Pride makes you individualistic. Humility lends itself to part of being something greater. You see, there's a difference between that and being a unique individual and being individualistic. Look, I look different than you because God made me different. I'm a unique individual. And there's nothing wrong with being unique. But individualism puts the credit back toward man. I'm a lone wolf. I'm strong and proud. I don't need anybody. It's all through my own effort. I don't need anybody. And when you think that way, you're being individualistic. And God hates that kind of thinking because it fails to give him any of the credit. And it gets in the way of the relationship between man and God. Proverbs 3:34 says, surely he scorneth the scorners, but he gives grace to the lowly. God hates pride because it makes men think that they can stand on their own. My own man. Listen, if you try to stand before God as a proud individual, you're going to get humbled really, really quick. And pride leads to all different kinds of sin. And sin gets in the way of the relationship between man and God. Because God cannot abide by sin in any way, shape, or form. And if we look at Proverbs, let's take a look at it now. Proverbs 16 through 19. We're going to see the passage that's commonly referred to as the 7 deadly sins. Even though the Bible never actually refers to them that way. In fact, I think it's kind of a redundancy when you think about it, because all sin is deadly when it's unrepentant. But let's look at what it does say. These 6 things doth the Lord hate, yea, 7 are an abomination to him: a proud look, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood, and heart that devise wicked imaginations, feet that be swift in running to mischief, a false witness that speaketh lies, and he that soweth discord among the brethren. Now, this is by no means an exhaustive list of sins, of all sins. God hates sins, but these are the 7 worst. And what's the first one on the list? Well, let's see here. A proud look. Some versions say haughty eyes. You know what that is? That's looking down on other people. That's thinking that you're better than somebody else because you have something they don't. That's pride expressed by a look. That's what that is. Galatians 6:3 says, "For if a man thinketh himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceiveth himself." A lying tongue. Why do people lie? To make themselves look better in front of others than what they really are. There's usually 2 reasons why people tell lies. To make someone else look bad or to make themselves look better than they are. And it's pride. It's pride that makes us not really want to fess up to who we really are and to make someone else not look as good in a good a light as what we could. You see, pride makes us lie. And God hates a lying tongue. When we have a lying tongue, we are not reflecting Jesus. We're submitting to pride. We're giving in to pride. Pride makes us tell lies. Hands that shed innocent blood. Listen, the only reason why anyone ever murders someone else is because they have allowed their own selfish wants and desires to deprive the other person of life, to overtake them and drive them to the despicable act of murder. Murder is driven by evil, evil pride. A heart that devises wicked imaginations. Someone that conjures up evil against another person in his heart. That's pride. Feet that be swift to running to mischief. Men who can't wait to cheat on their wives because they want something they know they can't have, that they shouldn't have. Pride makes them reach for the cookie jar. Pride gets us in trouble that way. A false witness that speaketh lies, like Gladys Kravitz in the Neighborhood, if you're old enough to remember the TV show Bewitched. Always watching someone else and seeing what everybody else is doing. And if she doesn't get the whole story right, she'll take half of it and she'll make up the rest. Lies to make everybody else look bad. Pride makes people gossip. And then we have he that soweth discord among the brethren, being a church gossip. That's even worse because you ought to know better. Only pride would want to make you tear somebody else down and build yourself up at the same time. And you know what? You're going to be held accountable for that pride. God's going to hold you accountable for that. We're here to build each other up, not tear each other down. You can amen that if you want to. Amen. That's what we're here for. We're here to build each other up, edify each other. Gossip doesn't do anything but tear somebody else down, and that's pride. That's pride. Now I'm going to get to the main reason why God hates pride so much. God hates pride because it creates a barrier between us and Him. A big old barrier. Pride caused man to fall. Pride caused Lucifer, the angel, to fall from grace because he wanted to take the place of God. That's what he wanted to do. Pride caused him to fall from heaven. He wanted to rule the universe. And that's in Isaiah 14:13. It says, speaking of Lucifer, "For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven, and I will exalt my throne above the stars of God." Pride. Pride brought Lucifer down. Pride brought man down. It was pride that made Adam and Eve want to partake in the fruit of the garden, because they wanted to be like God. They weren't satisfied with what they already had. They wanted the forbidden fruit over there. And they were tempted. And they gave in. And that's in Genesis 3:6. It says, "And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and it was pleasant to the eyes, and the tree desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof and did eat, and also gave it to her husband with her, and he did eat as well." Man failed his first pride test. And he brought the entire human race down with him. God hates pride because it caused man to fall from grace. That's the importance of pride. Are you starting to see a little bit how important it is now? What an important subject it is? And that's my main point today. If you don't come away with anything else from the story of old King Uzziah, you're going to see how his pride brought him down and sunk 52 years of his kingship. Because Uzziah's pride caused him to want to be something that he was not. And this is what this has to do with Uzziah. You may be saying, what does it have to do with him? I thought he was a good king for 52 years. Well, yes, he was. But he had a little problem here. He looked out on everything he had, and he wanted a little bit more. He looked out on his roads. He looked out on his bridges. He looked out on his fortresses. He looked at his walls. He looked at his army and thought, you know what? I'm bored. I want something else. I want to do something else. He had that little thing that was stuck in his craw, and it was called pride, because he didn't have enough to satisfy him. His entire kingdom was not enough to satisfy him. He wanted to do something more. He wanted to be something he's not. Let's skip ahead a little bit here in 2 Chronicles. We're going to take a look at starting with verse 16. 2 Chronicles 26, verse 16 through 18. But when he was strong, his heart was lifted up to destruction, for he transgressed against the Lord his God, and went into the temple of the Lord to burn incense upon the altar of incense. And Azariah the priest went after him, and with him 80 priests of the Lord that were valiant men. And they withstood Uzziah the king, and said to him, It appertaineth not unto thee, Uzziah, to burn incense unto the Lord, but to the priests, the sons of Aaron, that are consecrated to burn incense. Go out of the sanctuary, for thou hast trespassed, neither shall it be for thine honor from the Lord God. His heart was lifted up. Pride. And he went in the temple because he wanted to be something he was not. Uzziah wanted to be a priest, but he couldn't be a priest. Only the descendants of Aaron could be priests, and only they could go in the holy place and burn incense. You see, the way the sons of Aaron became priests back then was they were the sons of Aaron. They just grew up and they became priests. There was no training. There was nothing they had to go to. They didn't have to go to college and get a degree or anything like that. They just grew up and they became a priest. And they were the only ones that could become priests. And they were the only ones that could go in the holy place in the temple and burn incense. And Uzziah had no right to take that title because he was not a descendant of Aaron. He was not allowed behind the big curtain. Besides that, no mortal man could ever be prophet and priest and king, because that was reserved for who? The Messiah, right? Only the coming Messiah could ever be the prophet and priest and king. Let me just share something with you that a pastor taught me once. He said, when you go get called somewhere, always be yourself 100% of the time. Because sooner or later, the real you is going to come out. And I think that's great advice, because we can't be something that we're not. We can't be something that we're not called to be. Listen to me. If I was not called to preach, I would no more get up here and try to preach than I'd try to fly, because both of them would have the same type of results. You have to be called to do something like that. And we cannot let our pride tell us that we can be something that we're not meant to be, that God doesn't want us to be. God took that part of the temple pretty seriously. There was a story back in Leviticus about the sons of Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, who rushed into the temple and they tried to burn some strange incense. And what happened to them? It says that fire came down out of the sky and consumed them just because they were trying to burn some weird incense. And Uzziah probably knew all of this. He probably knew that story, but he didn't care. He let his foolish pride get in the way. And they confront him. Get out of here, Uzziah. You don't belong here. You're trespassing. You shall have no favor from the Lord God. Pride gets in the way of man and God again. And pride has been the downfall of many and many men who had a good thing going. President Richard Nixon was a very popular president back in the 1970s. And he did some good things. He helped end the war in Vietnam. He established relations with China. He got the EPA Clean Water Act passed. And he was going to beat George McGovern, the Democratic candidate, going away in the 1972 election. It wasn't even going to be close. But President Nixon let his pride get in the way, mixed with his paranoia. He thought that there was a chance he might lose to George McGovern, and he couldn't stand that. So he authorized a break-in at the Democratic headquarters at the Watergate Hotel, which brought down his presidency 2 years later. Still the only president to resign from office. Paranoia mixed with pride. Couldn't stand the thought of losing, even though he wasn't going to. Joe Paterno, the legendary Penn State football coach for over 50 years, was forced to resign because of a sex scandal involving one of his coaches that he apparently knew about years before. His pride would not allow him to turn in a friend when he found out about it, even though it hurt many, 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 many more people than his friend. And when it was all found out, he had to vacate some of his wins, and his statue outside the stadium was taken down, and he was fired and lived in shame for several months until he died, still not completely admitting to what he did. Pride. Pride brings down a lot of men, a lot of good people. And these are just two examples of how pride, the road that pride can take us down if we let it. We thought we were up here, we found out we're really down here. Not to mention other biblical figures like Samson, David, and Nebuchadnezzar. It's been said before, the test of a great person is not how they handle failure, but how they handle success. 1 Peter 5:6 says, "Humble yourself therefore under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time." Uzziah didn't want to wait to be exalted. He wanted to be exalted as a priest. He'd been exalted as the king for 52 years. Now he wanted to be exalted as the priest. And if we look back at 2 Chronicles again, our passage, if we look at verse 19, we see what happened to him. And it says, "Then Uzziah was wroth." That means he was really angry. "And he had a censer in his hand to burn incense. And while he was wroth with the priests, leprosy even rose up on his forehead before the priest in the house of the Lord from beside the incense altar. And Azariah, the chief priest, and all the priests looked upon him, and behold, he was leprous in his forehead. And they thrust him out of the temple. Yea, himself hasted to go out, because the Lord had smitten him. And Uzziah the king was a leper until the day of his death, and dwelt in a several house. Being a leper, he was cut off from the house of the Lord. And Jotham, his son, was over the king's house, judging the people of all the land." You see, you have pride mixed with anger. A deadly combination for Uzziah. You see, he was standing back, trying to hold back these 80 priests that were trying to stop him. And he had a censer in his hand. It was a metal tube about yay long. And they used it to light incense. And he had this censer in his hand. And he may have been standing back, trying to use it as a weapon against these priests that were trying to stop him. And leprosy broke out on his forehead, right on his forehead, so that everybody could see it. Now he couldn't hide it. He had to get out of the temple now because lepers were not even allowed near healthy people at all, let alone in the holy place in the temple. Uzziah had it all. He had money, he had fame, he had fortune, he had a great job, he had the throne, he had the robe, he had the what do you call that? Crown. Now he was just a leper. He was just a leper, and he was going to be punished for his pride. King Uzziah was a leper until the day of his death. And he had to live someplace else. Couldn't get near the temple or the holy place or the palace or anywhere else where he was allowed before. And his son was put in charge. God hates pride. And in order to have a proper relationship with God, we need to put away our pride. We need to put away our foolish pride. It makes us say we want so much more, and we need to bow down and we need to humble ourselves before God because we don't want him to do it. Believe me, we don't want him to be humble, to humble us. You won't like the way he humbles people. And I've never been humbled like Uzziah, but I've been humbled before. And believe me, it's not it's not very much fun at all. I don't want to be humbled by God. I want to humble myself before him. Now I know that Pastor and I have been preaching this Old Testament narrative for a few weeks now. He's been preaching on the prophets at the end of the Old Testament, and I've been preaching the Old Testament because that's what I needed to do for my assignment. But what I don't want you to do is, I don't want you to go away today from these sermons and forget that it's all about Jesus. Because every sermon that I do and every sermon that Pastor does eventually points back to Jesus. It points back to the cross. Everything we do, from way back in the book of Genesis, where God had a plan for the salvation of man, all the way from the very beginning of man, he had a plan for salvation. Everything that we talk about is all about Jesus. Eventually goes back to him. And that's what it's all about. And that's what I don't want you to forget about today. And I want to ask you something today before we wrap up here. If you were drowning in a lake and someone came along and said, "Take my hand, I'll pull you out," and you say, "No thanks, I'd rather try and save myself than submit to being saved by you," that would seem absurd, wouldn't it? Yet people do it every single day. I'd rather take my chances with the lake than submit myself to the will of Jesus Christ. What a tragedy. Pride. Pride can cause us to love our own life.